Part 1. Introduction. The forest whispered at night, not in a poetic way, but in the kind that raised the hairs on the back of your neck and made your breath hitch for no reason. People in the small town of Elm Ridge knew better than to step past the tree line after sunset, except for Mira. No one really knows why she did it, why she went into those woods, barefoot and alone, clutching a flickering lantern and humming like a child. But we remember that night, the way the wind stopped, the way every dog started barking, the way the forest swallowed her whole without a sound. She was never seen again. And that was only the beginning. Body. It started 3 days before she disappeared. Mira Dalton was 17, curious, quiet, and strangely disconnected from everyone around her. Not in a rude way, just distant, like she was always listening to something the rest of the U.S. couldn't hear. Her mother, June, was a town librarian, and their little house sat just half a mile from the edge of Cinder Pine Forest. Elm Ridge had always carried stories about that forest, about eyes in the dark, about the muffled sound of feet crunching leaves when no one was there. But those were just that, stories. Warnings passed down like family heirlooms. Don't whistle at night. Don't walk alone. Never go in after dusk. Mira, though, had always been drawn to the edge. That week, people started noticing things. On Monday, Mrs. Ellsworth swore she saw Mira talking to someone in the woods while she was walking her dog. But there was no one there. Just Mira standing on the edge, nodding at the trees, her lips moving like she was having a conversation. On Tuesday, Evan, Myra's younger brother, found tiny, twig-like figures strung with thread under her bed. Dozens of them, arms outstretched, heads tilted, each one marked with what looked like charcoal eyes. By Wednesday night, June Dalton went to sheriff. She told him Mira hadn't eaten in 2 days, that she kept waking up screaming about the crooked woman in the trees. She's not real, Mom. Mira had whispered in the kitchen that morning. She's a forest, and she's hungry. Sheriff Malden came by the house that evening. He talked to Mira on the porch while June looked on anxiously from inside. Mira smiled the whole time, too wide, too still. When asked if she was okay, she simply said, "I've been invited." He left unnerved, said there was nothing legally wrong, no grounds to intervene. But that was the last time anyone outside the Dalton home saw her. The night she vanished, the forest was unnaturally silent. No crickets, no owls, just an oppressive, suffocating stillness. June woke up to find the front door wide open. Evan was asleep in his room. Myra's bed neatly made, her shoes still under the dresser. Only the lantern was missing, the old one from the attic, dusty and ancient, the kind that burned with oil instead of batteries. There were footprints on the back porch, bare, small. They led down the path, across the grass, and into the forest. She was gone. The search lasted for weeks. Volunteers, dogs, helicopters. Nothing. Not a single footprint past the tree line. Not a single piece of clothing. It was like the moment she crossed over, she ceased to exist. Except that wasn't true, because things began to happen. Weird things. Children in town started talking in their sleep about the crooked woman, about someone who lived between the roots and the rot. Birds began smashing into windows at night, breaking their necks and bleeding out on front porches. Then the dreams started. Not everyone had them, but enough did. Dreams of Mira standing at the forest's edge, mouth open but silent, pointing inward, always pointing. Her face pale, her eyes black, her lantern flickering in the wind. The sheriff had won. So did Evan. So did I. And each time, the forest was darker, closer. Weeks passed. Then came the incident. It was nearly midnight when June Dalton burst into the police station. Her hands were covered in mud and blood, her nightgown torn. "They gave her back," she kept screaming. She came home. "But it's not her. That's not my daughter." Deputies rushed to the Dalton house. But Mira wasn't there. The back door was open again, swaying in the breeze. Only this time, something had been carved into the wood. 3 symbols, deep jagged, like claws had etched them in. An expert was brought in from the university upstate. He said the symbols weren't modern. They were ancient runes. Norse, maybe. He only translated two, return and host. By the next week, June had vanished too. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. Just a smear of muddy footprints leading from her bed to the front door and out into the woods. Same as Mira, only this time there were two sets of prints. One small, one much larger, and both barefoot. Now the forest feels alive. People hear voices on the wind. The trees shift when no one's looking. Something has awakened, and I think Mira was just the first. It rained the night they buried June Dalton's belongings. There was no body, of course, just a few of her personal items retrieved from the house. A photograph of her and Mira from 2 summers ago. Her favorite mug, still half full of cold tea. A cardigan with the left sleeve torn nearly off, as though something had pulled at it with unnatural force. Evan didn't speak during the service. He stood beside the closed casket, fists clenched, jaw tight, eyes unfocused. He was just 13, and now he had no family. The town didn't know what to do with him. Some offered to take him in. Others whispered that he should be sent away, somewhere safe, far from Elmridge and whatever curse had crawled from the trees. But Evan wouldn't leave. He insisted on staying in the Dalton house, alone, and the sheriff let him. No one quite knew why. Sheriff Malden had changed since June disappeared. He no longer visited the station at night. He kept his blinds drawn during the day. When he walked through town, he seemed to be listening for something only he could hear. His eyes darted to the forest more often than not. On the 3rd night after the service, a light flickered in the woods behind the Dalton house. A single lantern, pale orange, moving slowly between the trees. Evan watched from his bedroom window. He didn't sleep that night. In the morning, he went into the woods. He didn't tell anyone. He simply packed a small backpack, snacks, flashlight, a notebook, and walked past a fence, across the soggy grass, and stepped over first root. The forest air was colder than expected. Dense, too, like it wasn't just humidity but something else, something heavy pressing against the skin. Even the birds were quiet, save for the occasional low hoot of an unseen owl. Evan followed no path. There weren't any. Instead, he walked toward where he remembered seeing the lantern. His flashlight barely pierced the gloom. Shadows seemed to lean in from the trees, curling like fingers along the ground. Moss clung to the trunks like skin. Insects whispered unseen warnings. Then he saw it. Not the lantern, but something else. A figure. At first glance, it looked like a scarecrow, tall, thin, propped awkwardly against a tree with arms dangling at its sides. As Evan stepped closer, he saw it was made of bones and twigs bound with old cloth. The skull at the top was too smooth to be an animal's. Its eye sockets were deep, empty, yet Evan felt its gaze. Pinned to its chest was a piece of paper, yellowed and brittle. He reached up with shaking hands and tore it loose. Words were scrawled in what looked like ash. 3 are marked. 1 returns. The rest will follow. Behind him, a twig snapped. Evan turned. Nothing. The forest was still, but the scarecrow was gone. Evan ran, branches toward his arms. Roots reached for his feet. He fell twice but scrambled up again, heart hammering against his ribs like it wanted to escape. The flashlight flickered once, then died. He dropped it. The trees blurred past. And then, suddenly, he burst into daylight. He was back at the fence. And behind him, silence. That night, Evan locked every door and window. He didn't speak of what he saw, but he kept the note in his pocket, folded tight, even when he slept. 3 are marked. 1 returns. The rest will follow. The next morning, Sheriff Malden found something waiting on his porch. It was a dead rabbit, carefully gutted, hollowed out and filled with black feathers. A stick had been threaded through its mouth, skewering the tongue to the roof of the mouth. Its eyes were missing. Beneath it lay another piece of yellowed paper. This one read, "The eyes lie, but the roots remember." He burned the rabbit, burned the note, but he didn't sleep that night either. The town was changing, quietly at first. Dogs barked at empty corners. The church bells rang at odd hours, even when the ropes hung still. A fog settled over the forest and refused to lift, and in its haze, people began to see things. Children spoke of a tall woman with no face, of a hand pressing against their windows at night. Just a hand, no body. Of dreams that bled into the day. Mrs. Cartwright, the town's florist, went missing on a Sunday. Her shop was found undisturbed, but a trail of rose petals led from the back door all the way to the forest edge. No blood, no footprints, just roses. Her son claimed he saw her walking between the trees at dusk, wearing a dress she hadn't known in years, smiling but with too many teeth. She never came back. Evan started writing things in his notebook, drawings, symbols, snatches of things he heard at night, words that didn't make sense. Some nights, he'd wake with dirt under his nails. Other nights, his sheets were wet with dew, as though he'd been sleepwalking into the woods. But he never told anyone, because he had a plan. He'd been studying the scarecrow, the runes, the symbols carved into his mother's door. He was beginning to see a pattern, one that stretched back decades, maybe centuries. Every generation, the forest took someone, sometimes one, sometimes more. But this time it had taken Mira. And Mira wasn't like the others. Evan remembered what she used to say as a child, how she could hear things humming in the walls, how she'd sit by the forest and whisper into the air as if waiting for it to whisper back, how she'd always drawn spirals and knots, long before anyone taught her what runes were. Mira had been chosen. Evan didn't think she was dead. He thought she was waiting. On the 7th night after the funeral, Evan followed the lantern light again, but this time he was ready. He brought salt, a compass, 3 candles, a small knife, and a photograph of Mira and June. He entered the forest just after midnight. The light weaved through the trees like it was dancing. He followed it for hours. At one point, he stumbled across another scarecrow, but this one was different. It wore a blue ribbon around its neck. Myra's ribbon, the one she wore in 5th grade, the one June had sewn by hand. He didn't touch it, just stared, and then kept walking. The deeper he went, the stranger the forest became. The trees grew taller, thicker, their bark slick with something black and wet. The air buzzed, not with insects, but with energy, like the forest was alive and aware and watching. He came to a clearing. At the center stood a circle of stones. Inside it, ash, and within the ash, bones. Human bones. Evan stepped inside. The moment he did, the forest went silent. The light vanished, and something moved behind him. He turned. There she was, Mira, standing at the edge of the clearing, barefoot, dressed in a white gown stained with dirt and moss. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were black, not empty, but full of something ancient and deep and endless. "Mira," he whispered. She smiled, but it wasn't her smile. Not really. She raised one hand and pointed at the stones, at the ash, and then spoke, voice hollow and echoing with layers. "You came late, but not too late." Evan's knees weakened. He stepped forward. She stepped back, and the forest closed around her. She vanished into the dark, and the stones burst into flame. Evan screamed, stumbled out of the circle, and ran. This time, the forest didn't fight him. It let him go. He didn't stop running until he reached his front porch, breath ragged, smoke clinging to his clothes. He collapsed onto the wooden steps. In his pocket, the photograph was gone, and in its place was a ribbon, Myra's blue ribbon, still warm, still damp, as though freshly taken from her hair. Part 3. Evan didn't tell anyone what happened that night. He tried once. He went to Sheriff Malden's office, stood there clutching the blue ribbon like it might dissolve if he let go. The sheriff looked up from his cluttered desk, eyes ringed with exhaustion, and Evan opened his mouth to speak. But something stopped him, a sound, just behind the sheriff's chair. A low, wet rasp like breath through gnarled branches. The sheriff didn't react. Evan closed his mouth, turned around, and walked out. Back home, He opened his notebook and began to write again. Not words this time. Symbols. Shapes that curled and looped like roots beneath the surface of the page. He didn't know what they meant, but his hand did. It moved on its own now. Something had changed in him. He saw things differently. In mirrors. His reflection sometimes blinked a moment too late. Birds no longer flew near his house. And the air around him felt charged, like lightning waiting to strike. 3 days passed. Then, another child disappeared. Her name was Haley Murch. 7 years old. Lived with her grandparents on the edge of town. She vanished from her bedroom in the middle of the night. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. Just her teddy bear, torn apart and left on the windowsill. Sheriff Malden organized a search party. Volunteers, flashlights, dogs. They combed the woods for 2 days. Found nothing. Until the third morning, when a hiker stumbled across a clearing with a circle of dolls made of sticks and moss. In the center lay Haley's nightgown, folded perfectly. It was dry. It hadn't rained in over a week. But the nightgown was bone dry. No one said it, but everyone knew it. The forest had taken her. Just like it had taken Mira. Just like it had almost taken Evan. That night, Evan had a dream. He stood in the middle of the woods. The trees were gone, replaced by towering figures made of shadow and bone. Their eyes glowed with amber light. They circled him, chanting in a language he didn't know, but somehow understood. They were calling her, calling Mira, and then she was there, standing opposite him, her feet hovering inches above the ground. Her hair moved like it was underwater. Her lips moved, but her voice came from everywhere at once. You opened the path. Evan tried to speak, but no sound came out. You brought the flame. The bones remember. One of the shadow figures stepped forward, reaching out a skeletal hand. Evan woke up screaming. He found new marks carved into the wood beneath his bed. Symbols again, matching the ones in his notebook. Only he hadn't drawn them. He was sure of that. The next morning, he found something on his doorstep. It was a single feather, black as ink, tied to a length of hair. Myra's hair. He recognized it instantly. It still smelled like her lavender shampoo. He was being watched, not just by the forest, but by something deep within it. Something that was using Mira, her face, her memories, her voice, to pull him closer. And it was working. Evan couldn't resist anymore. He returned to the clearing. This time, he brought candles, notebooks, a small bottle of his blood, drawn with shaking hands and the same knife he'd carried last time. The forest welcomed him. He felt it. The trees moved aside. The wind whispered his name. Birds went silent, but not out of fear, out of respect, like he belonged. At the center of the clearing, the ashes were gone. In their place was a stone altar, rough-hewn, covered in moss and old blood. Mira stood behind it, waiting. She didn't speak this time. She just watched him as he approached. Her eyes shimmered, not black now, but gold, like sunlight through amber sap. He placed a bottle of blood on the altar. She smiled, and then disappeared into smoke. Evan stood there, shaking, not from fear, but from anticipation. He was close, closer than anyone had ever been. The forest was opening itself to him. Later that night, thunder rolled across Elm Ridge, but no lightning followed. Just thunder, long, slow, like a growl echoing from underground. The townspeople grew restless. They gathered in the church, whispering prayers, lighting candles, crossing themselves even if they hadn't believed in years. The priest, Father Doran, stood before the altar with his hands trembling. He tried to read from the Bible, but the words crawled off the page like insects, slipping between the lines. He dropped the book, and the candles flickered out. All at once, screams echoed inside the church. And above them all, a voice boomed, not from any mouth, but from the walls themselves. You could not stop the return. The town plunged into chaos. Lights flickered. Phones died. Radio spewed static laced with whispers. And from the edge of the forest, a fog rolled in, thick, greenish, pulsing like a living thing. Within it, shadows moved, watching, waiting. Sheriff Malden stood on the roof of his house that night with a shotgun in one hand and a flask in the other. He didn't fire a shot. He just watched the woods and drank until sunrise. When morning came, the fog was gone. But 3 more people were missing, and Evan was no longer just a boy. He was something else. He could feel it in his bones. He didn't eat anymore. Barely slept. The woods called to him like a lullaby. He heard Myra's voice in the wind, in the floorboards, in the heartbeat of the house itself. And he began to change. His eyes darkened. His veins turned a little too black beneath the skin. Animals fled at his approach. His notebook grew thicker with drawings. Circles within circles, maps of things that couldn't exist, runes from forgotten languages. And in the center of every page, always one symbol. A spiral made of thorns. One night, he found it carved into his chest. No pain, just a mark, his initiation. And then the voice came, not Myra's this time, but deeper, older, male and female, and neither. It whispered in his ear as he slept. You have been chosen. The roots are deep. The blood remembers. He woke with dirt in his mouth and moss under his fingernails. And standing at the foot of his bed was the figure from the woods, the bone scarecrow. Except now it moved. It reached out a hand. Evan didn't flinch. He took it, and the world around him dissolved. He stood again in the clearing, but now it was different. The trees were burning. The sky was red. Mira stood beside him, not as a girl, but as something ancient and regal, wearing a crown of bones and feathers. Her eyes glowed. Around them stood a ring of figures cloaked in shadow, each bearing a mark upon their brow. The spiral. You are ready, she said, but the town is not. They will resist, but we will bring them home. Evan nodded. He understood now. The forest wasn't evil. It was old, older than Elmridge, older than maps, older than God. It had simply been forgotten, buried, but now it remembered, and it had chosen its children. The next morning, Evan was gone. His house was empty, every surface scrawled with symbols. Candles burned down to wax stubs, feathers in the sink, ash in the bathtub. Sheriff Malden was the first to enter. He didn't speak, just picked up Evan's notebook and began to read, page after page. He didn't stop until his eyes bled, and when he left the house, he was no longer afraid. He went straight to the church, locked the doors, and lit a match. The fire consumed everything. By dawn, the only thing left of the church was a spiral scorched into the earth. The town tried to rebuild, but no one came to help. Phone lines stayed dead. Roads twisted the wrong way. Maps changed overnight. And at the edge of the woods, the fog waited. Behind it, Evan waited too. There was no sunrise in Elmridge anymore. Each morning came with a dull gray haze that refused to lift. The light was wrong, filtered through something unseen, like the sun had forgotten how to warm the town. Clock stopped ticking. Time moved differently, slower, or maybe faster. People couldn't tell anymore. Most didn't leave their homes. Those who did wandered the streets with vacant stares and mouths half open like they wanted to speak, but couldn't remember how. Whispers followed them, barely audible murmurs from unseen places, between walls, under floorboards, from the cracks in the ceiling. And every night the fog returned. Thicker now, hungrier, it crept down chimneys, leaked beneath locked doors, settled into lungs. Some claimed they heard music playing inside it, a lullaby they hadn't heard since childhood. Others saw shadows dancing the mist, tall and thin, with too many joints and too few eyes. 3 more houses were found empty, beds still made, food left half-eaten, doors locked from the inside. No blood, and no signs of struggle, just silence. And at the center of every abandoned home, a spiral drawn in ash. Sheriff Malden was never seen after the church fire. Some say he walked straight into the forest the next night, carrying nothing but a lantern and Evan's notebook. Others believed he burned with the church, offering himself in penance. But one boy swore he saw the sheriff at the edge of town, whispering to the trees. The trees whispered back. In the heart of the woods, Evan stood in the clearing, but it was no longer a simple circle of dirt and moss. It had change-grown. Stone pillars now ringed the space, carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. Vines crawled up them like veins. The ground pulsed beneath his feet. A heartbeat. The forest was alive, and he could feel it breathing with him. Mira sat atop the altar, barefoot, her hair flowing as if caught in a constant wind. Her skin shimmered like bark and bone, something not entirely human anymore. Not entirely anything. "You've done well," she said, her voice layered with echoes. Evan nodded. "They're almost ready." "They'll never be ready," she smiled, tilting her head. "But they'll come all the same." He stepped closer, kneeling before her like a worshiper before a god. "What happens when the spiral completes?" She slid from the altar, feet landing silently in the dirt. Then the gate opens. Evan looked up, and what comes through? She leaned in, lips close to his ear. "The rest of us." That night, the dreams began again, not just for Evan, but for the entire town. Everyone in Elmridge dreamed of the forest, of roots growing through their skin, of mouths blooming from tree trunks, whispering forgotten names, of mirrors that showed other versions of themselves, screaming, begging, rotting. No one slept more than a few hours. No one woke the same. Children drew spirals in their cereal. Dogs barked at empty walls. The mayor hung herself from the town hall rafters. Her final note simply read, "The trees are listening." By now, the population of Elmridge had halved. Some fled, some vanished. Some simply walked into the woods and never came out. A few tried to fight back. Reverend Green from the Pentecostal church gathered what few believed him and began nightly prayers at the town square. They held torches, chanted psalms, cried for mercy. On the third night, fog rolled in while they were still gathered. They didn't scream. They just stopped moving. Each one froze in mid-chant, eyes wide, mouths ajar. When the fog cleared, their bodies were gone, but their voices remained. Every night after that, the same chant echoed from the square, disembodied, tired, begging. Evan walked the town freely now. No one stopped him. No one could. Wherever he went, the fog followed in slow tendrils. He wore a necklace made of teeth. Feathers hung from his sleeves. His eyes no longer held color, just spirals, endless and shifting, like portals to something deeper. He knocked on doors, whispered through mail slots, left bones wrapped in silk on doorsteps. "You've been invited," he said to one elderly woman who dared open the door. "The forest remembers your name." She died 3 days later, drowned in her bathtub, though the water was never turned on. The night after her burial, her grave was found empty, and in its place, a sapling grew. The town's last hope was a man named Marcus Clay. He was a former journalist from Boston who'd moved to Elmridge 6 years ago to escape his past, a past filled with war zones, corruption, and too many lost friends. He didn't believe in ghosts, didn't believe in curses, didn't believe in evil, until the fog took his daughter. She was 5. Her name was Junie. She had laughed all morning, played in the backyard, drew chalk shapes on the driveway. By afternoon, she was gone. The only thing left was her shoe, perched on a tree branch far too high for any child to reach. Marcus snapped. He spent 3 days drinking. Then 3 more loading his van with supplies. Holy water, books on folklore, torches, maps, weapons. He wasn't going to pray. He was going to burn the forest down. On the 7th night, Marcus walked into the woods. He never made it to the clearing. The trees closed behind him. The fog swallowed his footprints. And for a moment, just before silence returned, the town heard a scream, long, raw, not entirely human. No one spoke of Marcus after that. But people said that sometimes, when the wind blew just right, you could hear a voice in the trees, whispering, "She's here. She's watching. She remembers." At the center of the spiral, Evan stood with Mira beneath a sky that no longer showed stars. The clouds above churned in strange, unnatural patterns, like something was pressing against him from the other side. "The gate is almost open," she said. He could feel it. The ground quivered. The trees leaned closer. The spirals drawn in chalk and ash across the town began to glow faintly, connecting in unseen patterns. A massive glyph drawn across streets and rooftops, designed not by human hands, but by the forest's will. One final name needed to be spoken. One final offering. Mira placed a finger to Evan's chest, just above the carved spiral. "Bring her back," she whispered. "You remember where she is." He nodded and turned toward the last place anyone saw Mira alive, her family's home, still boarded up, untouched since the night she vanished. Inside, dust blanketed every surface. Photos still hung crooked on the walls. The dinner table remained set, and in Myra's room, the bed was still unmade, as if she'd just stepped out. Evan moved with purpose. He walked to her closet, knelt, and pried up the loose floorboard. Beneath it was a bundle wrapped in velvet. He unwrapped it slowly. Hair, teeth, a rib bone, things a child might steal from herself in secret. Offerings made in love and fear. He held them in shaking hands and smiled. The spiral in his chest throbbed. As he stepped outside, the wind howled not around him, but through him, like something ancient had awoken inside his lungs and was stretching for the first time. And all across Elmridge, windows shattered, mirrors cracked, the spiral burned with blinding light, and the forest began to move, not sway, move. Roots broke through concrete, branches snaked through streets. A massive shape stirred beneath the hills, shifting, groaning, rising. Something older than the town, older than language, older than death. The gate was opening, and Evan, once just a lonely boy with nightmares, was now its key. Part 5. The ground heaved beneath Elmridge like a dying animal, groaning as though something enormous twisted just beneath the surface. Roads split open with jagged cracks, vomiting soil and roots. The air grew heavy, damp and humming with low frequencies no one could place. People covered their ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside them, inside their teeth, their skulls, their thoughts. The trees had moved closer overnight. That was the first thing everyone noticed when they woke. Pine and birch that had once lined the forest edge were now encircling houses, growing where fences used to be, curling around porch steps. No one had seen them move, but they had moved, and the fog never lifted. Not once. Evan stood in the middle of Main Street, his bare feet sunk slightly into the asphalt that now pulsed like it was breathing. Around him, the last of the town's survivors watched from behind curtains and boarded windows. He carried the velvet bundle in his hands, hair, teeth, and bone, and he whispered names as he walked. Every house he passed dimmed. Lights flickered. Paint peeled. Screams echoed faintly from deep underground. Behind him, the spiral burned in the air, suspended in nothing, twisting slowly. A hole in reality. A door. No longer chalk or ash. It shimmered now, made of light and shadow, turning endlessly inward. Mira waited inside the forest, standing before the ancient stone pillars. The clearing had transformed again. The moss was gone, replaced by a blackened, scorched circle that radiated heat. The trees bent toward her as if in worship. From their branches hung objects, dolls, animal skulls, rusted wind chimes, and dozens of mirrors, all of them cracked. She looked older, taller. Her eyes were glassy and dark, like polished stone. When Evan approached, she smiled. "Did you find it?" He unwrapped the bundle and held out with both hands. Her memory, her pieces, all she left behind. Mira reached out but didn't take them. "Not for me," she said gently. "For the gate." Evan turned toward the spiral. Its surface rippled like water. Within its depths, faint images flickered, a massive form writhing in darkness, eyes like lanterns, arms that bent the wrong way, mouths inside mouths. It had waited a long time. For her, for him, for the town to forget how to protect itself. He stepped closer to the spiral, holding the bundle tightly. The wind screamed around him, pulling at his hair, his skin, his breath. Behind him, Mira began to hum, soft and familiar. The lullaby. Evan whispered Myra's name and fed the bundle into the spiral. The effect was immediate. The spiral flared white-hot, then imploded into itself with a sickening crack. A wave of force exploded outward, flattening trees, toppling houses, and knocking Evan to ground. The forest howled, an actual howl, guttural and massive, like something that had just been born and hated the world it was born into. Above the ruined clearing, the sky tore open, not a metaphor. It tore, a jagged, yawning rift like a wound stretching across the clouds, exposing a churning void beyond. Something inside it stirred, a colossal shape, serpentine and dripping, with too many joints and too little symmetry. Its breath turned the clouds black. Its gaze turned trees to ash. Evan stared up at it, unmoving. He had opened the gate. He had brought her back. But it wasn't Mira anymore. It wore her shape, her voice, her eyes. But now, they looked through him, not at him. "You were the lock," it said in Myra's voice. "Not the key." Evan's heart stopped. He dropped to his knees, clutching his chest. The spiral on his skin sizzled, cracked, and peeled away, revealing raw, open flesh beneath. Blood poured in rhythmic bursts, matching the pulse of the thing overhead. "You gave yourself freely," it whispered, "and now you belong to Forrest." Roots erupted from ground, coiling around Evan's arms, legs, chest. They dragged him down slowly, reverently, like a god claiming its sacrifice. He didn't scream. He didn't resist. He simply wept, and the forest swallowed him. By dawn, if you could call it that, the town of Elmridge was unrecognizable. Trees grew from rooftops. Streets were rivers of bark and rot. Buildings twisted at unnatural angles. Windows melting like wax. Every mirror reflected something different. Sometimes yourself, sometimes the woods, and sometimes nothing at all. The few remaining survivors were no longer entirely themselves. Their eyes moved wrong. Their voices echoed. They answered questions before you asked them. Some walked on all fours. Some never blinked. One girl began coughing up black feathers. They didn't fight. They served. Each one marked with a spiral somewhere on their body. Inside the church ruins, something had begun to grow, an altar of bone and root, pulsing with life. It hummed when people approached. It bled when touched. And at its base, a new spiral bloomed each day. 10, then 20, then hundreds. Spirals on trees, on walls, in dreams. Everywhere, the forest was no longer a place. It was a state of being, a living memory. It had waited centuries to wake. And now, it dreamed through Elmridge. One final visitor came weeks later. A woman in her 30s with a camera and a notepad. A reporter, maybe, or a hunter of legends. She drove past the old Welcome to Elmridge sign and stopped when the road ended in vines. Her last recording was found months later in an abandoned motel 2 towns over. The footage showed her walking through a canopy of twisted trees, the forest unnaturally silent. She whispered observations into her mic, her breath fog in the warm air. She noticed carvings on the trees, faces, hundreds of them, twisted in agony. Then the whispering began, first behind her, then in front, then inside the microphone itself. She turned to run, but the path had vanished. Trees pressed in impossibly fast, closing her in. Her flashlight died. The screen went black. Her last words, barely audible. "She's not gone. She's watching. She's everyone now." The tape ended with the sound of leaves rustling and a child humming the lullaby. They say if you listen closely in the early hours between sleep and waking, you can still hear Myra's voice on the wind, not calling for help, not asking to be found, just watching, just remembering, waiting for the next name, because she never really disappeared. She became the forest, and the forest remembers everyone. Part 6. No one lives in Elmridge anymore. At least, not in the way you'd understand. The town still appears on maps, But if you follow GPS or road signs, the directions begin to stutter, looping, rerouting, glitching a way that seems mechanical at first. But it's not. The forest knows when someone is coming. It plays with the machines, plays with expectations, pulls people in one at a time, or sometimes two, just to give them hope that they'll survive together. They won't. Gideon Lambert was one of those who should have known better, a self-proclaimed mythbuster. He had made a career out of debunking urban legends and forgotten folklore, posting dramatic exposés on social media. His followers adored him, his smug smile, his relentless skepticism. Elmridge, to him, was just another target, a chance to disprove the town that vanished overnight. He brought a team, 3 others, a camera guy, a sound tech, and his girlfriend, who never said much but always kept close to him. They parked just outside the forest edge, near what had once been the gas station, now twisted into a shape that didn't make architectural sense, its pumps suspended in the air like marionettes, hoses hanging like tendrils. Clever art installation, Gideon muttered, filming a close-up of the warped windows. We're going to walk right in and find a bunch of stoners in deer masks. They never made it past the first hour. The footage, recovered from a shattered drone found hanging in the trees by a hiker weeks later, tells the story better than words can. The group walks confidently into the woods, laughing, swearing, cracking jokes. Then, slowly, their laughter fades. The forest seems to tighten. Leaves stop rustling. Even the birds vanish. Gideon jokes about the silence. His girlfriend doesn't laugh. The camera catches her turning toward the trees, listening. Her eyes widen. She walks toward something off-screen. The others call to her, irritated. She doesn't respond. When they follow, she's gone. There's no scream, no sound, just the slow creak of branches closing in. That's when the whispering begins. At first, the team brushes it off as a prank, a hidden speaker, a trick of the wind. But one by one, they begin to hear their own names in the whispers. Gideon panics. He runs. He leaves them. The camera drops. 36 minutes of static. Then a brief image, just 2 seconds. Gideon's face, staring directly into the lens, but his eyes are hollow, spiral-shaped voids. His mouth is smeared with dirt. His skin appears carved. The words, "I was wrong," are etched across his forehead in dripping cuts. He blinks once. Then the tape ends. Some say Gideon became one of them. One of the many who now walk the forest trails at dusk, no longer entirely human, no longer lost but never found. Others believe the forest absorbed him, added his memories to its twisted archive. No one knows for sure, but people keep disappearing. A week after Gideon's failed expedition, Elmridge returned to the headlines, not in mainstream outlets. Those had long since buried the story, but in dark corners of the internet, where grainy photos and conspiracy threads fed paranoia like wildfire. A man in a diner 2 towns overclaimed his daughter had come home from school humming a tune she couldn't explain. When he asked where she'd heard it, she just smiled and said, "The girl in the mirror taught me." She disappeared 2 nights later. The mirror remained, cracked, and in it, he swore he saw trees. That was the start of what came to be known online as the lullaby effect. Dozens of similar stories poured in. Children singing unfamiliar songs, people waking up with pine needles in their beds, spiral-shaped bruises appearing overnight. It wasn't just an Elmridge anymore. It was spreading. The forest had learned to reach. It whispered through glass, through sleep, through silence. There were rules, of course. Or, more accurately, there had been rules once. Don't enter after dark. Don't answer the whispers. Don't speak your name aloud after sunset. But those rules no longer applied. The forest didn't need you to come to it. It had found a way to come to you. That's when May returned. May Holloway, the park ranger who had found Myra's bike all those months ago, and then vanished without a trace. She came walking out of the woods on the 12th night of the blood moon, her boots soaked with black mud, her face streaked with soot. She carried nothing, said nothing. She walked into the middle of the highway and collapsed. When the hospital staff examined her, they found something bizarre. No signs of physical trauma, but dozens of foreign memories crowding her mind. Names she didn't recognize, events she hadn't lived, voices layered like a corrupted tape. She didn't speak for days. Then, just before dawn on the fifth morning, she began to draw, not with pens or pencils, with her fingernails, on the hospital walls, on her bedsheets, on her own arms, spirals, thousands of them, overlapping, endless. She whispered, she's still watching, again and again, and then, finally, she told him what she saw. Not everything, not all at once, just fragments. That Mira hadn't died, that the spiral wasn't a symbol, it was a seed, that the forest had chosen her to grow into something new, that she had roots now. And every time someone said her name, every time someone remembered the story, those roots grew further, spread deeper. She was never lost, May whispered, eyes glazed. She's remembering everyone who tried to forget her. That was the last thing May ever said. She slipped into a coma the next day. And that night, the trees around the hospital moved 3 inches closer. Doctors called it structural shifting. Locals knew better. They left candles outside the doors. And they never said Myra's name aloud again. But stories kept leaking out, too many to ignore. A mother hearing her dead daughter's voice in trees. A hiker vanishing mid-call, her phone still transmitting the sound of distant humming. Entire houses waking to find moss growing on the inside walls, sprouting from mirrors and vents. Elmridge was gone, yes, but it was also everywhere now. The forest had changed the rules of what was possible, of what was safe. It had found a way through, and it was still expanding. The last known footage came from a hunter's trail camera on the edge of a wildlife reserve, nearly 200 miles from Elmridge. The video showed a girl, young, barefoot, hair matted with leaves, stepping from between 2 trees that hadn't been there the day before. She looked straight into the camera, smiled, and whispered a name. Not Mira, yours. Part 7. They say the forest only comes for those who deserve it. But no one really knows what deserve means anymore. Nina Harrow had never believed in curses. Not when she was a child and her grandmother warned her to stop playing under the black willow tree. Not when her older brother went missing after exploring the abandoned train tunnel on a dare. And not when Mira vanished. Even though Nina had seen her only hours before the disappearance, smiling nervously in the mirror at school while brushing her hair. But something changed the night Nina dreamt of her. In the dream, Mira wasn't the girl she remembered. Her eyes were sap-black, with spiral pupils that pulsed like wounds. Her lips didn't move when she spoke, and her voice came from behind Nina instead of in front of her. The words were soft but unmistakable. You still remember. That's enough. When Nina woke up, her feet were dirty. Bits of pine needles clung to her blanket, and there were thin scratches across her forearms, as if she'd run through dense brambles. She didn't remember leaving her bed. She didn't remember dreaming beyond Myra's whisper. But the dream kept coming back, night after night. Each time, Mira got closer, and the forest behind her grew taller, thicker, darker. By the 7th night, Nina couldn't sleep at all. She walked through her house with every light on, mirrors covered with bedsheets. Even the smallest reflection felt wrong, distorted. Not a trick of the eye, but something watching her from within the glass. At school, she stopped talking, stopped making eye contact. Her friends tried to pull her back, but she had begun to fade into herself, like an afterimage that refused to leave. Then came the day when the spiral appeared. It wasn't etched onto a tree or scratched into a desk. It was in the hallway, burned into the linoleum tiles outside the science lab. Perfectly round, smoldering slightly as if drawn by fire. No one could explain it. The teachers dismissed it as a prank, and maintenance tried to scrub it clean. But by morning it was back. Only now there were 3 spirals, each one darker. Each one with something writhing faintly inside, like smoke trapped under glass. That's when people started whispering Myra's name again. Not in mourning, in fear. The stories resurfaced. The missing posters, the pictures from the search parties, the rumors of the forest growing closer, of those who went looking and never returned. And with them came the new stories about how saying her name could draw her to you, about how the spiral marked you for remembering. Nina tried to block it all out. She stopped going to school, stopped answering texts. Her parents begged her to talk, but even their voices sounded hollow, as if muffled by leaves. The air in her room felt heavy, like it belonged somewhere deeper, somewhere roots curled and fed on memories. She could hear whispering now. Always. Sometimes from the vent, sometimes from the corners of her closet, where darkness lingered too long, and sometimes from her own mouth, moving without permission while she slept. By the end of the week, she understood she was being called. She packed a backpack at dusk, a flashlight, her old hiking boots, a compass her father had given her before he disappeared into the Elm Ridge woods 2 years ago, and a photograph of Mira taken a week before she vanished, the one where her reflection didn't quite match the way she stood. She didn't tell anyone, didn't leave a note. She simply walked out the front door and kept going, toward the trees. The forest was waiting for her. It didn't start with trees, not exactly. First came the air, cooler, stiller, sweet with decay. Then the sounds faded, cars, wind, voices. Even her own footsteps grew muffled as the grass grew thicker beneath her. And then came the trees, twisted and unfamiliar, the bark rough with symbols she didn't recognize, shapes that moved when she wasn't looking. She passed a stump and saw something shift inside it, a pale face, smiling with too many teeth. But when she turned fully, it was gone. The compass spun, the flashlight flickered, and still she kept walking. Time warped. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. But eventually, she came to a clearing. There, in the center, was a door. No frame, no wall, just a door, freestanding in the middle of the forest. It pulsed faintly as if breathing. It was blackened, and in its center was a perfect spiral, carved so deep she could feel it humming in her chest. She reached for the handle. The whispering stopped. Silence crushed her ears. Then the door opened on its own. Inside was not another room, but more forest. Only this forest was wrong. The trees grew upside down, roots clawing the sky. Leaves bled black, and in the distance stood Mira. She hadn't aged a day. She wore the same clothes she disappeared in, now fused with vines and bone. Her hair floated behind her like it was underwater. Her eyes no longer held human warmth, only the spiral, spinning slowly. "You remembered," she said. Nina wanted to scream, but couldn't. Her voice had been taken. "You kept me alive," Mira continued. "Every story, every whisper, they're seeds, and you've been planting them." She stepped forward. With each step, the ground shuddered. Nina felt herself sinking. The forest swallowed light, swallowed thought. "You were chosen," Mira said, "and now you'll become the next." The next what? Nina thought but couldn't ask. The trees answered for her. They groaned and split, revealing faces and bark. Faces frozen in silent screams. Some she recognized. Gideon, May, her father, all spiraled into the wood, their eyes empty and pleading. "You'll be the story they fear next," Mira whispered, placing her hand on Nina's chest. Pain bloomed, cold and ancient. Roots burrowed beneath her skin. She felt her heartbeat slow, sink with something deeper. She wasn't Nina anymore. She was part of the forest. A memory made flesh. A new name waiting to be whispered. Part 8. The forest no longer whispered. It watched. Nina's breath fogged the strange, upside-down air. Trees twisted above, below, everywhere. Gravity felt untrustworthy, like the rules here bent to something older than time. She could still feel Myra's touch, burned into her chest like a second heartbeat, pulsing with something not her own. But she wasn't fully gone yet. She still remembered who she was. And that, in this place, was dangerous. The forest fed on memory, on identity. It consumed names like tinder, burning them down until only echoes remained. Echoes that walked, whispered, and waited for new souls to take their place. If she let go, even for a moment, she would become another spiral on the bark, another face locked in a tree, another warning that no one would listen to. She had to move. The forest twisted around her, the ground breathing like lungs. The trees moaned in strange languages. Somewhere behind her, a low, guttural cry rippled through the air like thunder underwater. She didn't turn to look. Not this time. Instead, she walked, toward the place where the light dimmed the most, the place where the roots were thickest, where the trees leaned in close, like eavesdroppers waiting for her thoughts. The spiral carved into her chest grew warmer. It wanted her to turn back, to go deeper into the false woods, to let Mira guide her fully into forgetting. But Nina remembered Myra's face before Forrest took her, the girl who loved music, who wanted to be a writer, who used to braid flowers into her hair and press them into the pages of her sketchbook. This thing, this being, wasn't Mira anymore. She was a vessel, a seed, a story grown wild. And Nina was not ready to be rewritten. She reached the river by mistake. Or maybe it reached her. It ran uphill, churning black, filled not with water but a sludgy reflection of the forest itself. Branches floated inside it, and faces stared up in the current, familiar and foreign. One of them blinked at her. It was her own. Her reflection didn't copy her movements. It smiled wide and slow, and then mouthed something she couldn't hear. The spiral on her chest pulsed in response. The river hissed. She stepped back. A root lashed out, snagging her ankle. She fell hard, into the mud, into the rot. When she pulled herself up, her hands were covered in eyes. Tiny, blinking eyes all along her fingers, her wrists, her palms. They stared at her with mournful curiosity, some of them crying silently. She wiped them off in panic, and the mud peeled away to reveal skin again, normal for now. But the forest had marked her further. She could feel it. Each step felt heavier. Each breath tasted older. Something stalked her now, not Mira, something bigger. She heard it between the trees. Snarls that didn't sound entirely animal. Branches cracking. The faint sound of song, humming off-key, looped over and over. Then it began to speak. "You're late," it said in a voice that was many voices layered into one. "You were expected," it murmured again, now closer. "You should have forgotten by now." She broke into a run, her boots barely skimming the uneven forest floor. The trees parted and closed like ribs. Vines tried to catch her. Thorns whispered her name. The path beneath her changed with each step. Stone to moss, moss to bone. She found a tree with carvings. Names. Hundreds of them. Some scratched deep, others fresh. Myra's was there. So was her father's. So was hers. Nina Harrow. But something was wrong. Her name was only half carved. Not finished. She had a chance. A groan rolled through the forest like an earthquake. The trees leaned back, and the sky above bled into itself. Purple and black and red. A figure stepped from the mist. Not Mira. Not quite. It wore Myra's face, but older. Twisted. The spiral in its forehead turned slowly, emitting a faint, unbearable hum. "You shouldn't have run," it said. Nina stepped back. "What are you?" It tilted its head, almost amused. "I'm what Mira became. What she made herself to survive. You can too." "I don't want to survive like that." "You won't. You'll become. Just like everyone does. Eventually." She felt the pull again. A twisting sensation in her gut, in her thoughts, like her memories were being plucked and rearranged. She focused on a single image. A day at the lake, before everything went wrong. Her father's laughter. Mira singing off-key in the back seat. The warmth of sunlight on her shoulders. It burned through the fog for just a second. The creature recoiled. "You remember too well," it hissed. "That's why I'm here," Nina said, voice shaking. "To stop this." It smiled, full of too many teeth. "Then come find the root. Cut it if you dare." The world spun. The forest folded around her like a curtain falling shut. She was elsewhere. A cave, deep and endless, open before her. In its heart, something pulsed, vast, ancient, alive. A mass of tangled roots and bones and sorrow. It looked like a heart carved from tree bark and stone, beating slow and deep. Whispers came from every surface. You could stay. You could sleep. You could forget. Nina stepped forward. Every memory she had tried to slip from her grasp. Myra's face, her father's voice, her name. She screamed against it, forcing memories back into place, one by one, anchoring herself to them like ropes tied to a ship in a storm. And then she saw it, at the center of the root heart, a knife, old, iron, buried deep, the spiral pulsed faster. Nina reached in, the roots writhed, trying to stop her. Thorns dug into her skin, drawing blood that hissed as it touched the earth. But she didn't stop. Her fingers closed around the hilt. She pulled. A scream tore through the forest. Trees fell. The river reversed. Faces screamed inside the bark. And somewhere, far above, the sky cracked. She held the knife high, turned it toward the pulsing heart, and drove it down. Black sap exploded upward, covering her, blinding her. And then, silence. When Nina opened her eyes, she was on the edge of the forest. The trees were still. The spiral on her chest had faded. Behind her, the woods looked ordinary, boring, even, but she knew better. She walked home barefoot, cold but alive. For now. Part 9. Nina didn't tell anyone where she had been. Not her father. Not her friends. Not the therapist who asked gentle, cautious questions about trauma, about hallucinations, about whatever she might be ready to share. She smiled. She nodded. She said the right things. But every night she listened because the forest still whispered. It had gone quiet when she stabbed the root. Yes, the howling stopped. The trees stood still. The sky no longer bled. She had walked out without looking back. But she hadn't broken it. She'd only wounded it. And it was healing. Sometimes at night, when the wind blew just right, she could hear Myra's voice again. Faint, crooning, lost, and sometimes answering. She tried to live like nothing had changed. Took long showers. Scrubbed her skin raw, trying to forget the feeling of bark against flesh. Tried not to stare too long at trees. Avoided spirals. But the forest didn't let go so easily. 1 week after her return, she woke with her fingernails packed with dirt. 2 weeks in, she started finding dead leaves in her bed. Wet ones. The 3rd week, she dreamed she was sinking, into soil, into root, into that ancient, pulsing heart all over again. But it wasn't a dream. Not really. She began sleepwalking. Her father caught her the first time, standing barefoot in the backyard, eyes open, face blank, staring into the tree line like something was calling her. The second time, she had carved a spiral into her own arm with a kitchen knife. Not deep, just enough to stain the sheets red. She didn't remember doing it, didn't feel pain. But when she looked in the mirror, she swore, for just a moment, she saw someone else in her reflection. Someone with hollow eyes and dirt-stained teeth. Someone who wore her skin like a borrowed coat. She knew what it meant. The forest wasn't finished with her. It had sent her back for a reason. To plan her. She didn't want to go back. But that wasn't her choice anymore. One evening, while walking home from school, the world changed. It was slow at first. A shift in the air. A smell, wet bark, rot, moss, decay. Then the sidewalk beneath her cracked like a dry branch. Grass pushed through the seams of concrete. The sky darkened, even though it was barely past 4 p.m. Crows circled above her in a perfect spiral, and the road behind her was gone. She turned in every direction. Houses faded. Cars vanished. Sounds dimmed. Only one thing remained. The tree line. Closer now. Waiting. She took a step back, heart pounding. Then she saw the girl. At the edge of the woods. It was Mira. Not as she was before. But not the twisted creature, either. Somewhere in between. Her head tilted. Her mouth moved. But Nina couldn't hear the words. So she followed. The forest let her in this time. No resistance. No illusions. It welcomed her. And that was worse. The path was clearer than it had ever been, but unfamiliar. It led her to a place she hadn't seen before, a clearing in the shape of a spiral. Trees evenly spaced, almost symmetrical, too symmetrical. In the center was a stone table. On it, something lay covered by black cloth, Mira stood beside it, waiting. Nina approached slowly, each step sinking into moss so thick it muffled all sound. She stared at the cloth. "Is that me?" she asked. Mira didn't answer. She just gestured toward the table. Nina pulled the cloth back. It was a body. Her body. Pale. Still. Lips slightly parted. Spiral carved into her chest. A perfect replica. Or maybe not a replica. Maybe. The realization hit her like a sickness. She was already dead. Had been the moment she entered the forest the first time. All this time, walking, running, escaping. It was just delay. Denial. The forest had claimed her. It had always claimed her. This was just the moment it let her see the truth. Mira finally spoke. "You brought it back to life when you left." "What?" "The forest. It's not a place. It's a story. One that needs to be told. It needs a voice." "I'm not its voice." "You are now. You survived the heart. That makes you the next root bearer." Nina shook her head. "No. I fought it. I stabbed it. And it gave you a seed for your trouble." Mira stepped closer. "You feel it growing, don't you?" Nina's chest ached, right where the spiral had been. The skin felt hot, stretched. Something pulsed beneath it. "I don't want this," she whispered. "It doesn't matter what you want. The forest listens, but it doesn't ask." Mira held out her hand. In her palm lay a small, black sprout, delicate, alive, twitching. "You'll need to plant this," she said. "Soon, or it'll plant itself." Nina backed away. "I'm leaving." "You're already part of it. There's no leaving. Only choosing where your roots grow." The spiral clearing began to shift. The trees bent inward. The ground cracked. The stone table crumbled into dust. The sky above flickered like faulty lights. Nina turned and ran. Through the forest, through trees that reached like fingers, past whispers that tried to burrow into her mind. But she didn't stop. Couldn't. The forest howled, angry now, offended. She had seen too much. She had refused her role. And stories didn't like being interrupted. She burst through the tree-line into a new place. Not home, but not entirely the forest, either. It was between, the in-between world. A ghost of her hometown, overgrown with moss and silent trees. Cars rusted into the ground. Buildings hollow. Time frozen. She stood in the street, catching her breath. Then she saw the others. People, dozens of them. Some standing, some kneeling, all unmoving. Their eyes were covered with bark, their mouths sown with vines. They were the ones who tried to leave, who didn't take the seed, who tried to forget. Nina touched her chest. The heat had grown stronger. The spiral burned beneath her skin, visible now even through her shirt, glowing faintly. She understood then. She had a choice. Take the seed. Become the next voice of the forest, the next root bearer, or join the others in the in-between. Forgotten, nameless. She sank to her knees, clutching the seed Mira had left in her coat pocket. It pulsed gently in her palm, alive with memory. And then one last thought came. Maybe the forest needed a voice, but maybe, just maybe, it could be rewritten with a different ending. She didn't know how yet, but she still had one thing the forest hadn't taken. Her will, and that was dangerous. Part 10. The seed pulsed in Nina's palm. It didn't have a heartbeat, not exactly, but something inside it moved like it was breathing, or waiting. The warmth of it crept into her skin like tiny roots searching for soil. And Nina knew, if she kept holding it, it would burrow deeper. It wanted to be planted, either in the ground or in her. All around her, the forest in-between worlds stood still. The bark-blind people hadn't moved. Their silence pressed against her ears like pressure at the bottom of deep water. Nina rose to her feet, pocketing the seed. Not yet, not on their terms. Somewhere behind her, the forest groaned, like an old beast waking up. A voice, low, feminine, and far too close, spoke from the trees. "You cannot walk away from the story, child. You are the story now." Nina didn't look toward the voice. She kept walking, through the abandoned street, past the shell of what looked like her childhood school, overgrown with moss that pulsed when she stepped on it. The world flickered again, and in the blink between steps, she saw her real town. Clean, normal. Cars drove by. A bus pulled up to the stop. Children laughed. And then back to silence. The forest wasn't just inside the trees anymore. It was bleeding out. The story had begun rewriting the world. And Nina was still its anchor. She stopped in front of the rusted skeleton of a church. Ivy had cracked the walls wide open, and a tree had grown through the roof like a spike through its heart. She stepped inside. The pews were rotten, but one figure sat perfectly still in the front row. Her father. Except not him. This version of him stared straight ahead, hands clasped in prayer, mouth sewn shut with something green and alive. "Dad!" Nina whispered. His head turned slowly. He smiled, but it wasn't a smile she knew. This was the forest using his face. A message. Return. Take root. Finish what began. "No," she said aloud. "I'm not yours." From her pocket, she took the seed, and for the first time, she squeezed it. The shell cracked. A shriek ripped through the forest, sharp and angry, echoing across trees and sky and soil. Something ancient had been wounded, but Nina wasn't done. She dropped the cracked seed onto the church floor, stomped it under her boot, grinding it into dirt and broken stone. "Try growing from that," she hissed. The world around her twisted. The sky turned black. The wind screamed. The forest did not take betrayal lightly. Branches tore through the walls. Roots surged up to the floor, wrapping around the fake version of her father and snapping him in half like a puppet. Nina ran, out of the church, back into the streets that were no longer streets. The buildings bent. Shadows bled. Her feet pounded on something between dirt and flesh. The forest was collapsing on itself, and on her. She had broken the story. She had refused her part, and now it wanted her erased. But she had one last idea. She raced back to the spiral clearing, the one where the stone table had crumbled, where the false mirror had offered her the seed. Now it was empty. The trees groaned. The sky above swirled. And there, at the center of the spiral, stood the heart tree. It had regrown, but barely, thin, twisted, pale bark like stretched skin. And in its trunk, pulsing faintly, was the same mark she carved with the root dagger. It hadn't forgotten. Neither had she. She approached it slowly. The tree trembled. She reached into her backpack and pulled out the spiral-covered journal she'd taken from Myra's cabin in Part 4. She had nearly thrown it away. Now she opened it. Inside were stories. Hundreds of them. Different names. Same path. They all ended the same way. Consumed, replaced, forgotten. The forest always won, because the story never changed. Until now, Nina took a pen and wrote a new ending. Her own. It was short, but it was hers. She went into the forest. She faced the story. She refused to be its voice. And instead, she burned it down. The words glowed on the page. Then the journal caught fire in her hands. A cold, white flame that didn't burn her, but the spiral on her chest flared in pain. The trees shrieked. Flames licked the grass. The trees bent away in panic, and the spiral clearing began to unravel. It wasn't just fire. It was unmaking. The story was breaking. She had rewritten it. The heart tree split down the middle with a sound like thunder. Black sap spilled out, sizzling into the flames. The whispers stopped. The wind stilled. Then silence. Real silence. No breathing shadows. No watching eyes. Just air. And ash. Nina stood in the remains of the spiral clearing. Everything was gone. The forest was gone. Nothing but a charred circle, a deep silence, and her. And something new. Sunlight. Real sunlight. She walked forward and passed through, out the other side, into her town. The real one. For real this time. No tricks. No flickers. She stood on her street, her skin still warm from flame, the spiral now a faded scar. Her father stood in the doorway, not blank-eyed, not sewn shut, just alive. Tears filled his eyes. He didn't ask where she'd been. He just ran to her, held her, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. In the weeks that followed, Nina wrote everything down, every detail, every scream, every twist, every root. She didn't forget a single part, but she didn't publish it. Not yet. She kept it hidden. Because sometimes when she passed a tree in the park or saw a knot in the shape of a spiral, she felt something shift, like a story still waiting, lurking, and she needed to be ready. Because though she had rewritten her own chapter, there were others still trapped, others who had never made it out, others who were still listening. And stories? They don't like unfinished endings. Not for long. Elle,